it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Christina Samore. Christina Samore is a PMI certified project management professional with a dual degree master's in museum studies and an MBA from John F. Kennedy University. She has 10 years experience working as a registrar and collections management professional in various institutions, such as the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, Pixar Animation Studios, and Los Angeles County Museum of Art. She is currently a project manager at Carvana. Okay, Christina, the floor is yours.
All right, let's get rolling. Let me go ahead and share my screen. That's gonna be this guy, share.
Sounds like my glasses, where it's oh no, that's just for frames.
And then just a friendly reminder to keep yourselves on mute. I would be greatly much obliged. So thank you for that. All right. So thank you so much for having me today, and for NEMPN for organizing. I am excited to share with you some of my experiences in navigating project management from a museum perspective. Can everyone see my slide okay?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I think as we move along in the presentation, you'll probably realize that you've already been doing some sort of project management. So hopefully this will help bridge the informal with the formal practice. So there are several project management methodologies, so I'm only going to be able to give a brief overview of the most common types and some tools that support each one. Purpose of this presentation is to just touch on those few key practices and fundamentals that you can take or leave as best suits your needs or institutions. So a lot of PM professionals may argue that adhering to a strict methodology is the way to succeed. I am a firm believer in hybrid approaches and just doing what makes the most sense. So I hope that if you take anything away, you'll find that project management can bring structure and organization that improve upon any process and will hopefully just make your life easier. I've already got an introduction already, so I appreciate that. So I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I do know that a few of you may be looking at my background and maybe scratching your heads at how I ended up at Carvana, especially in the IT department of all places. But I think it just goes to show what useful experiences and transferable skills you do pick up in museums. You learn how to interact with a multitude of personalities, operate with very limited resources, and overcome some really challenging aspects in creative and resourceful ways. And employers in other fields do see that. You know, everything I just listed makes you an ideal candidate when looking for most jobs and an invaluable asset in any organization. So for anyone looking to transition into project management in particular, I would recommend looking into a certification, as I think that in conjunction with my museum background contributed to an easier time in shifting careers. So I learned about project management through my graduate studies, but didn't pursue my certification until a few years later when I was working as a registrar at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. And I was looking for professional development opportunities. And as I learned more and more about project management, I had this light bulb moment of, I'm already doing project management. I've been doing project management my entire career. So I spoke to my boss about it, and we agreed that formalized project management would be beneficial to the museum. So he encouraged me to enroll in some courses, and I was able to implement what I learned at the museum. And I was kind of able to use it as my own personal case study in seeing how project management works in museums in real time. So I've said it a whole lot by now, but what is project management? So according to the Project Management Institute, project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements, which is just a fancy way of saying herding cats. And I think that phrase is so accurate when it comes to describing project management, because most of the time your role as the PM is chasing updates, especially if you don't have any kind of tool or method to track updates for others to see, which I found was very typical in museums. So someone comes to you and asks, where are we with this? And you chase down the person responsible for that work, you get the update, and you take that update back to the original person, and they ask you about this other thing, and you go find this other person, So it can just be this never-ending, grueling cycle without the right kinds of practices and tools. And I have completely embraced the cat theme, so I try to use as many cat pictures as possible. I hope that won't be a problem. So Project Management Institute is the global association of project management professionals granting certifications across a broad spectrum of project, program, and portfolio management methodologies. There are other accrediting bodies of project management, but the PMI has made its name very well known in the global market. There are three kinds of levels when it comes to project management, kind of in the shape of a pyramid. So you have projects at the bottom, which are tactical to an organization, a temporary endeavor to create a unique product, service, or result. A program is a series of related projects working towards a larger shared goal, which is intended to be strategic. And a portfolio comprises of all the current projects or programs within the organization and is driven by overall vision. So what is your institution's driving force? What long-term objectives does your institution have? And what projects can you, should you take on to achieve that vision? And I do want to clarify on some terminology I'll be using moving forward to eliminate any confusion, because there is some overlap in terms that both projects and museums use. So I know that program means something different in the museum world. So I will use programming for museum events targeted towards visitor engagement, and program as related to projects is just defined. And then I will also be referencing key project artifacts. Artifacts meaning documentation that will be referenced over the course of the project, not an object in a museum's collection. So in terms of museums, consider the museum's mission as its vision or guiding force in building its portfolio. Everything a museum does relates back to its mission, from collecting or deaccessioning artwork to implementing educational programming. I've listed some examples of projects in museums here, but if anything ever crops up that makes you say, I really wish we did this. This will make our lives so much easier. You know, turn it into a project. Try applying some of what we'll cover today, and then let me know how it goes. I've always been fascinated about the project management track in museums. I'm going to be using one exhibit I worked on at the UMFA to help illustrate some of the practices that I'll be going over. So Race to Promontory was a traveling exhibit that ran January 2019 to May 2019 and celebrated the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. So in project management terms, Race to Promontory as a traveling exhibit could be considered a program. You have this overarching theme of the exhibit with all the individual projects designed to tie back to that theme. So we have public programming such as guest lectures and free museum days with maker activities. We had a gala for fundraising efforts. The collections and exhibitions department prepared for the receiving and installation of the artwork. Marketing organized their campaigns and compiled their press kits. So all of those are projects that fall under the larger program that support that exhibit. Projects are constrained by three factors: schedule, scope, and budget. I added resources in there after budget because I actually like resources more than using budget. Resources, I think, is a more of a catch-all term. It can apply to budget as well as materials, you know, whether it's low quality or short in demand, and workforce and labor, you know, maybe not enough headcount. So changes in one constraint means that one or both of the other constraints will change as well. So a very basic example to illustrate: you're painting a house blue, and 3/4 of the way through, your customer wants the house red instead. So changing that color is a change in scope, which leads to costing more money for paint and labor budget, and will push out your finish date, your schedule. If you don't properly adjust for these changes, this can impact the quality of the work as well. So your client comes back to you after you tell them, you know, it's going to push out their end date and says, well, no, I really need you to keep that same end date. Well, okay, but your house is not going to look great because it'll be a rush job. So is that something the client is willing to sign off on? What is the acceptable risk? And so we'll touch a little more on those questions in the presentation when we discuss change management. Again, since there are so many different methodologies, I'm only going to cover the big two: Waterfall and Agile. And even then, I won't be able to cover everything because there is just so much. So I'm just going to touch on those key concepts, project artifacts, and techniques that I feel can be very helpful in museums. So both project management methodologies were designed with software development in mind, but have been adapted in so many different ways that several industries use them as best suits their needs. Waterfall was the first methodology that has roots going back to the 1950s and wasn't really defined as such until the 1970s. It's still very heavily used today, but more prominently in construction projects. It's called waterfall because of the way the project phases cascade into the next. So certain deliverables or objectives have to be completed before moving forward in the project. The majority of work is planned in advance, with many of the key project artifacts in place before project execution even happens. The con with this approach is that changes are difficult to implement or come at a great cost. So the farther along you go into a project. So again, thinking of that house example, that'll cost more money and take longer, and or perhaps result in poor quality. Agile came along in 2001 and was developed specifically with flexibility and customer focus in mind that Waterfall tends to fall short on. I think that because Agile is so versatile, this allowed for more versions of it to be developed and provided an easier transition into project management for other fields. So marketing firms, I think for instance, they'll use some version of Agile because it allows for greater focus on interactions with customers. And this increased interaction allows you to be more in tune with user requirements and how they may evolve over the course of the project. The goal with that being to increase customer satisfaction with the finished product. But this can make it difficult to establish a strict plan for how the final outcome will look. And this can lead to one of the biggest cons with Agile, something called scope creep. You have project scope, which is essentially the goal or objective you hope to achieve. So having that flexibility to change requirements or implement more designs in your scope can just get bigger and bigger until you find yourself working on something that isn't related to the original intent at all. So you're painting your house blue, and then your customer asks for white trim. Sure, we can add that in. We paint houses, right? Now the customer wants to repaint the door. Okay, yeah, we still paint. That's within our resources. Oh, now they want a new door altogether. Now they want new windows. So you see there's that potential for snowballing. The customer's needs keep changing, but there's not a system in place to identify overall effort required or a way to establish finality of a project. So these illustrations show how projects progress in each model. So waterfall traditional on your left, again, is that cascading flow. And on the right, you have that circle in Agile. That's what's known as a sprint. We'll go over that in a bit more detail in a later slide. So in Waterfall, the 5 stages of a project as defined by PMI are initiate, plan, execute, monitoring, controlling, and close or exit. And they're defined as such so you can apply them to projects outside of software development. So this was kind of revamped a little bit from when Waterfall was initially developed. I'm going to be diving a bit deep into these phases, as I found that many exhibits or museum projects in general unknowingly follow the Waterfall method. I realized this when I was first learning about project management. And it helped me connect that informal with the formal, again, when we started implementing some of these techniques. And so in covering this framework, it makes project process a bit more manageable or approachable. It gives you a place to start. It kind of helps you put the puzzle pieces in place when it comes to successful project planning. So initiate is where the project is defined. Detailing the objective, key deliverables, and stakeholders. This is documented in the key artifact called a project charter. So looking at it through the lens of a traveling exhibit, the project charter, would be the exhibition contract. This has everything: key dates, specific requirements needed for the artwork, image usage for marketing purposes, verbiage museums must use, payment terms, who's allowed to handle artwork, etc. This is probably also the phase where museums would start working to secure funding to host the exhibition so that they can establish their budget. And we all know that in the museum world, funding is critical to any function. So figuring this out as soon as possible so that the museum knows whether or not we can host the exhibit is usually the first place to start. And then I don't know if the font is big enough on that picture for everyone to see, but I just want to read it. So it says, everything is covered in the contract. Tuna, cheese puffs, no dogs on the premises, clean litter boxes, warm lap availability, just sign on the dotted line, human, and we're done. So contract cat is a lot clearer on requirements than most project sponsors I know. Plan. This is where the actual project work is defined that will take place in the execute phase. This is where you also narrow in on the timeline, identify any key milestones. This work has to be done by this time or else it throws off everything, right? So for example, if you're repainting the gallery walls for the exhibit coming in, what's the absolute latest to have that done by, but still have the paint dry in time to get the artwork on the walls? And that's an especially crucial question when you've got a tight turnaround between exhibits. So traveling exhibition schedules are usually set 2 to 3 years in advance. So you would think that gives you a good chunk of time to plan everything, but still somehow the unexpected always crops up, which might be a bit of an understatement. And I think this area has the biggest potential for museums to adapt project management. This is the phase where you document everything. How will you communicate with stakeholders about project updates? Which stakeholders will be doing what work? What risks might we encounter through the project course? How do we mitigate those risks? How to handle changes in the project plan? And that's not even everything. There are so many plans for every kind of situation. And that's also, you can be prepared as much as possible for any scenario that comes your way. And having these plans are also useful for whenever someone has a question on how to do something, you can point to this document and say, read the plan. And so that's one of my favorite things about Waterfall. Everything is written down, nothing is left unsaid. And all of these plans and key artifacts should live in what's called a knowledge base. This is your repository for all project documentation that's easy for the project team to reference, whether it's in a shared drive, some sort of cloud application, or even in physical files. And keep in mind that while the planning is happening for this larger program, planning at a somewhat smaller level is also happening for individual projects by department. Visitor engagement submits proposals and budgets for programming, planning for those really big events like fundraising galas, advertising strategies, designing the exhibit layout. My time as a registrar would be determining the installation schedule. So again, all these projects working to support the program as a whole. So before moving on with the other phases, I wanted to touch base on one of the artifacts that would normally be developed in the plan phase, and that's a RACI framework. These frameworks are used for identifying key stakeholders, your project team, and deliverables, and they're essentially your roles and responsibilities matrices. So RACI is for specific project deliverables and provides for transparency on who is responsible for what, making it easy to talk to the right person when you have questions or need updates. And this is kind of the crux of project management. Someone says they're gonna do the thing, the PM asks them if they did the thing, why didn't they do the thing? So that acronym RACI, the R is the person responsible for completing the work, A, the person accountable to review the deliverables and deemed complete, C, this person is consulted in providing feedback on how the deliverable may impact other aspects. So if any programming were to take place in the galleries, education would consult with the registrar to verify that whatever is entailed follows the contract. I for informed, this person's informed of the deliverable progress to be kept in the loop, but not really needed for decisions or expertise. So this could be the curator updating the registrar on a change in the layout so they can adjust the install schedule accordingly. And you can get as broad or as granular with RACIs as suits your needs. List by departments or specific team members, so long as you identify those roles and deliverables. And then making sure you get buy-off from project stakeholders. Everyone has seen it and agrees with what's been assigned. The goal, again, is to grant transparency into workloads, streamline communications, avoid overloading people, and setting clear expectations. So this is my favorite example of a RACI framework. It's just really a lot of fun. It's the Lord of the Rings and just who's responsible and accountable and consulted and informed. I think it's flawless. So if you ever kind of get confused on how it should work out, I definitely recommend Googling this guy. It's pretty great. Execute. All right, this is it. It's go time. We've identified all the work that needs to be done. So let's get it done. There's really not too much to explain for this phase as it's pretty self-explanatory. So for exhibits, this phase can have multiple start dates depending on the project in the program timeline. But all united around the key milestone of the exhibit's opening date. So prior to the opening, marketing has launched their campaigns and sent their press kits. Artwork is here, hopefully, and is getting installed. Maybe the day of the opening, you have some sort of big event. And then after opening, education has their programming schedule in place and launches those throughout the run of the exhibit. The fourth phase is monitoring and controlling, and it's actually meant to coincide with the execution phase. This is where you keep track of project performance. So think of it as execute is what we're doing, MNC is how we're doing. It's about quality control. How do you measure the quality or success of your project? And how do you ensure that the quality of your product or service remains high until the project is complete? Project managers will use metrics called key performance indicators to help measure how a project is doing, usually based on budget, schedule, meeting objectives, could be other things as well, and taking current metrics gathered from the execution phase and comparing them to what was projected in the plan. So that's the easiest way to assess overall project health, is how you're doing against the original plan. Issue logs is more of a software or tech term, but the concept is the same in any industry. Any issues, blockers, obstacles that crop up during the course of the project, you keep track of them in this document. You'll record what the issue is, how it occurred, who reported the issue, severity of the issue, name of the person responsible for fixing the issue, and that last one, previously identified, will be in your risk management plan as defined in the plan phase. So this issue log document is another great visualization tool to assess your project health, but also a good tool to include in your lessons learned after project completion, which we will cover in the next slide. So the exit and close phase is where the project is officially closed out. The work is not quite done. So after every project, teams should hold a reflection review or a post-mortem, even though I hate that term, so please use reflection review to identify what went well and what could have gone better. This is also a good opportunity for team recognition. I know this may seem a bit common sense, but I didn't realize how beneficial shout outs were until I worked at Carvana. Working in museums, everyone is very much so heads down, gotta get the work done. But when you take the time to reflect on how awesome the team is and call out wins, this not only boosts morale, but really shows your team that you are paying attention and they are valued as a key player. So even if you're not in a leadership or managerial position, I highly recommend showering your coworkers with praise every once in a while, because that could also do wonders for team bonding as well. So lessons learned, I may be a bit biased because I am a registrar by background, but documenting everything is vital to the success of current and future projects, especially when it comes to projects that may seem a bit repetitive. So you may realize, I've come across this situation before, how did we handle this in the past? And that's where you'd be able to turn to your lessons learned repository or within your knowledge base and find that answer so that you can follow that process that worked so well before. And then again, you want to make sure that all this project documentation from all the phases is kept in that central place for everyone to access your knowledge base. Again, it can be a shared drive in the cloud somewhere, physical files, again, just whatever works best for your team. So now we're going to transition into discussing Agile. But before I do, I just want to provide another recap of how these methodologies differ. So Waterfall tends to be more focused on processes and documentation, while Agile focuses on individuals and interactions. So in looking at this image, you have two projects that essentially have the same objective, creating a mode of transportation, but arrive at that outcome in different ways. So in Waterfall, you have a clear goal in mind and work towards it, but you can't really shift gears, pun intended, whereas in Agile, you're working off a set of requirements rather than a final outcome. So with each iteration, you adjust for customer needs, even though how you end may be completely different from how you start. And I think the best way to illustrate the Agile methodology is detailing one of its most widely used frameworks, Scrum. So in Scrum, you plan work only a few weeks in advance, which are called sprints. And a sprint is a period of time where a certain amount of project work gets done, and they can last anywhere from a week to a month, just depending on whatever schedule you set for your team. And you utilize these sprints to allow more easily for change. You execute in pieces rather than everything at once. So if the client or sponsor doesn't like how a certain aspect is turning out, you can pivot a lot easier and fix it right then and there, rather than waiting for a completely finished product and having to go back and change it. And this is very similar to how a new application is designed. A company releases an app or, even an operating system, and occasionally you get those notifications of release 1.2.x that has all these new features is now available, install now. And that's pretty much Scrum or the Agile methodology in the background at work. So all of the work you have to do in a project is called a backlog and is ranked by priority, and more work can be added to the backlog as it comes up. So before each sprint starts, you have a planning session where you select which items you'll work on and who will work on them. Then you have the implementation period where that work gets done. And afterwards, you review or test to ensure your objectives were met in doing that work. And then the retrospect is looking back and identifying anything that went well or could have gone better. What actions will you take to improve upon your process in the next sprint? And every day during each sprint, you have 15-minute meetings first thing each morning with your team called daily stand-ups. So you go around the table and you answer 3 questions. What have I worked on since yesterday? What issues do I need help resolving? And what am I working on today? So this may sound a bit odd, considering I just said a whole lot about how Waterfall and Agile are so different, but I found that using a loose interpretation of the sprint framework in the execute phase during a waterfall project actually works really well for certain museum projects. And again, that's that hybrid approach I was talking about earlier. Specifically for me, in my experience, installs and deinstalls. So my backlog is all of the artwork that has to be unpacked and go up. And each day of the install is its own sprint. So every day I would go over with my team. This is the artwork we will be unpacking and installing today in this order. These folks on unpacking, these folks on condition reporting, you guys on installing, or you can identify assignments in advance with the RACI. And we also take the time to go over any issues that may have come up yesterday and how to adjust or improve today. To provide a non-collections example, because I've been doing a lot of collection stuff, sorry, it's just one of my default. But if you have a weekend event celebrating some sort of anniversary or grand reopening, and you have a lot of activities going on that weekend, meaning Saturday and Sunday, that each team is responsible for, have those daily stand-ups so that you can review what happened yesterday and how to improve on anything and how today is going to go. And then retrospectives at the end of the weekend so you can take a look at everything as a whole. All right, Kanban. I love Kanban. This is my favorite. So this was actually developed in the 1940s, and Kanban is a framework designed to visually represent work items and statuses all at once, allowing team members to see the state of every piece of work at any time. This is definitely my favorite tool because it's the simplest in concept, but also the most effective when it comes to creating transparency into project plans. So I implemented a Kanban board at the UMFA through an application called Trello, which got us out of tracking work through paper checklists and Post-it notes that got lost easily. So it was the best thing for our department. And again, its simplicity is what made it so easy to adapt, therefore making it the most successful change that we could have done for our needs. So just to kind of break down these components here, so you have Kanban cards. Each task is represented by something called a card, which contains information about the work, its status, deadline, assignee, description, any notes. You have your Kanban, you have your columns. Each column on the board represents a different stage of your workflow. So the column on the left is the work waiting to be worked on, sometimes called to do or requested. The middle, you got your in progress. to designate what is currently being worked on. Last column is done or completed. So again, you would move the cards through these columns depending on where they are in the workflow. And then you have work in progress limits. So these restrict the maximum amount of tasks in the different stages of the workflow. So for instance, I don't want my team, my individual team members, working on more than 3 tasks at a time. So I will impose that limit on that column so that they can only focus on those 3 tasks. And limiting this allows them to finish work items faster, or really just helps them focus on the work at hand. And it's aimed to prevent against burnout or getting lost in the shuffle. And then you have swim lanes. I've actually never used these, either at the UMFA or at Carvana. But these are horizontal lanes that you can use to distinguish between separate teams, maybe departments, or separate work activities. Oh, change management. All right, this is a big one. If I could do 5 presentations on change management alone, there's just so much to it. So if you've seen anything you think would be useful to implement at your institutions or in your roles, this would most likely be a change to how you're already doing things, right? And as we all know, change is hard, especially if you have to bring several people on board who might not think anything needs to be changed in the first place. So that's why a practice called change management has been gaining a lot of traction over the years. And change management can actually refer to either changes to the project plan or within the organization. So something like implementing a new product or service. But overarching concepts of what you hope to achieve through change management are essentially the same. And a key artifact for how to handle changes in a project plan is called, surprise, surprise, a change management plan. And the approach to change management is not unlike project management. So you have models and methodologies you can follow with wanting to identify key details before executing on anything. On the left is kind of a sum up of what those phases can look like, with some questions that are helpful in verbalizing the change. And on the right is the ADKAR model. This model is really helpful in providing a simplified breakdown of how to approach change. Sorry, I'm a little parched. Give me a second. Okay. So when it comes to changes to the project plan, usually when those changes crop up that you know are going to impact something critical or be a risky endeavor, your first instinct might be to say no. But the most valuable lesson I've ever learned, first in my museum studies program and then supplemented by working in museums, is not to say no, but to ask how. So that same attitude applies in change management. So with the change management plan, you can dictate that change requests be submitted with specific information related to those 4 points or whatever criteria you deem relevant, so that requester defines the how for you. And then you take that back to certain stakeholders and certain stakeholders responsible for approving changes, and they can evaluate based on overall effort or benefit whether or not the change is worth it. So for me, I found that what helps most in navigating these changes is setting those clear expectations and providing just all the information up front. So in the race to promontory example, so we're about 1 week out from install. My schedule is set and approved by the couriers, artwork is en route, and I get a call from the marketing director that she would like to invite members of the press to witness and report on the installation of some very big ticket items, one of which being the ceremonial golden spike used to mark the railroad complete. So this was the last spike, right, that went into this railroad, and it's golden. So very high value. So typically you don't allow anyone outside of collections or exhibitions in the space during installation because it presents a safety and security risk to the artwork. But this event is so huge in terms of publicity. She did not want to pass this up. And we really did understand, how advantageous it would be to bring in the press. Very high profile, right? So the benefits outweigh the cons. We created a plan. So we created a plan together of how the whole interaction would go down. Spikes would already be unpacked. Packing materials would not be shown. Press would only be allowed in a certain section of the gallery while the artwork is moving. You know, she wanted these shots of the spikes being rolled in on the cart and then being placed on the mount. So again, work that's not secure is a safety at risk, a safety risk. And this is the time that press would be allowed in the gallery. Then they would be moved outside the space to ask the curator any follow-up questions while we resumed installation. So this project change was especially sensitive because we had to gain approval from not one courier, but two, since the spikes were from one museum and the traveling exhibit from another. And so our time is precious. We only have these couriers for a few days to install everything. So any time out from install could result in some pretty drastic delays if we didn't plan the timing just right. Fortunately, we did get approval from the couriers, but here's the real kicker. On the day of, when the press is supposed to show up, the marketing director tells me that no one actually confirmed that they would be there. So I guess it must have been an exciting news day. She asked us to hold off for as long as possible in case someone did show up. But again, we're in a time crunch. So I think we waited like 15 minutes after the time we would have allowed press in. And I just made the call to get our collections photographer to film the footage the marketing director was hoping for so that we could send it to the news outlets instead. So this is a great example of lessons learned or something to be debriefed on. We committed really hard to a change that did not pan out, but we made it work anyway. So for future requests like that, we now know we have the option to have our staff just film whatever we need and then distribute as desired for publicity purposes. I know that meetings can have a bad rap, especially if there's that one person who thinks meetings are the answer to everything. But meetings can be very beneficial when executed properly, especially when you need to get timely feedback or updates, or to ensure alignment on project work decisions. So here are a few good rules of thumb for when to schedule a meeting versus getting updates asynchronously. Needing to problem solve together, maybe discussing how to unblock project work that's getting held up, or if you've got a tricky piece of artwork to install, like say a 300-pound mirror ball that needs to be suspended 6 feet off the ground and rotate. You might want to have a few design sessions or two with your team to discuss those logistics. Some other questions to ask to help determine if you need a meeting are, does the information you need or wish to give require a time-sensitive response? Has there been a lot of back and forth over those asynchronous communications regarding making a decision that would just benefit from some really quick verbal alignment? But yeah, if you're scheduling a meeting strictly to get an update on work currently in progress with no blockers or coming up as due, that's a poor use of time for you and your team, especially if you are already utilizing some sort of project management tool that captures project work and people are updating as they should. And if you don't have one, this is a great reason to get one so that you can cut down on those meetings. I've listed some do's and don'ts on how to run effective meetings, which I think are pretty self-explanatory. Distributing the agenda before and after the meetings is actually a really big one. This helps on alignment on how the meeting will go and also enforces accountability. So if someone says they'll do something, you record it in the notes and then you share it for all to see. And if things are going off topic or people are spending too much time on something that not everyone needs to be a part of and you know you need to move on, this is the best phrase to use. Let's take this offline. That signals hopefully to your project team that they can take that discussion either asynchronously or schedule their own meeting, but essentially we have to move on. Again, beware of scope creep. So if someone wants to add something not previously discussed, send them through your change process because you got that now. So here are some really common project management tools, and this isn't everything. There's so much out there, so definitely feel free to kind of do some searching on your own as well. But the purpose of these tools is to track work all in one place that everyone has access to. So eliminating a lot of guesswork, creating transparency, and even help automating and the tracking of some repetitive work. I've used about 4 of these tools I've used Trello, love it, highly recommend it. I've used Jira, RACI, Teams. So again, Trello is that straight up Kanban board, easy to use. Jira is on the complete opposite side of Trello. It is very hardcore, very agile. It was designed specifically in mind to be an agile tool. But from what I've heard from agile practitioners, like this is the go-to tool if you want to be really serious about agile. Otherwise, I think the rest of these are pretty similar in terms of functionality. Again, just focusing on tracking that work, team resources, schedules. The majority of these, Trello, I think Monday.com, Trello, Monday.com, RACI, Asana, they all have free basic packages. So if you're just looking to explore a little bit and play around, create yourselves an account and just really test that functionality and see if it might work for you and your team. All right, homework, because I said at the very beginning I wouldn't have time to cover everything. So this is only if you want to really nerd out about project management, or if you really want to learn more and dive a bit deeper into these concepts. So knowledge areas are the project management field as a whole, according to PMI, are broken down into these 10 knowledge areas, and they coincide with the 5 phases in traditional project management. Gantt charts are a visual representation of the project schedule. Dependencies is what it sounds like. We know which work is dependent on other work before it's able to start or finish. Critical path. So a lot of people will say Gantt charts are the nerdiest thing a project manager can do. I'm going to argue with that. I'm going to say it's critical path. So this is a method or an algorithm that sequences dependent tasks that form the longest duration, and this allows you to determine the most efficient timeline possible to complete a project. And it's called critical because out of the other project sequences, this is the one where if anything is knocked off course, it impacts everything. It throws off the entire project plan. So you have algorithms for it, or you can actually calculate this stuff, the path by hand. So that's why I'm saying it's like the nerdiest. And then you have SMART goals. This is an acronym. It's a reference tool to help you plan for goals. So specific, measurable, actionable, or attainable. I've heard both, realistic and time bound. And then there's this podcast that I really like. It's called PM Happy Hour. It's these 2 project managers discussing project management best practices and experiences, and is really a great way to learn more about these concepts in an approachable manner. And that's it. Thank you again so much for attending. Please feel free to keep in touch. I've got my personal email there. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then this is the first time, I don't know if you could tell, this is the first time I've presented on this topic. So thanks for being my test audience. And if you have any feedback or comments, like if something was informative or if there were other concepts I could explain more or focus on more, I'd really love to know. Feel free to reach out. And I think we're ready to transition into questions.
Yeah, we did get a couple already in the chat. So the first question is, what if the person resisting the change and is the source of many of the project management issues is the executive director or a board member?
Ooh,
great
snap.
question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So for those tough cookies like that, I found that if you really dive deep into the motivations of why they want to keep the change and then connect with them on that level. So if they're saying like nothing needs to change, we're perfect, and then you show them maybe results of like, and you say, why would you say that? Why do you think we are perfect? And that they come back to you maybe with some things like, this is how we've always done it, and blah 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 blah. Come back to them and say, I've gotten feedback from all of these other team members that do disagree with you. Unfortunately, we think that this would be a really great thing to implement or adopt. This is the motivations from other people, from the experiences that they're having. And a term that we use with any kind of technology is rollback, right? So you kind of put out a solution out there and you say, let's just try this out. And if it doesn't work, we'll roll it back. So maybe try talking them into a test period. Like, let's just work on it. Here are the metrics that we'll test on to see if it's really useful, this change. And then we will present on those metrics at the end of this trial period, which will hopefully illustrate that the change is worth it, is necessary. And then if not, you prove this right, I guess we'll go back, either way. So just depending on what your change is. But yeah, that's what I found to be the really helpful. Hopefully that helps.
All right, thanks, Christina. The next question is, how do you create buy-in to support more transparent project management and remove any gatekeeping?
Yeah, that is hard. So for the gatekeeping aspect, definitely bringing those people on board to a lot of the conversations so that they know what those changes are going to be, so that they're just aware of everything. Because usually, I actually have another slide in here that I didn't use because I was short on time. But let's see if I can actually, not smart. This one, this cross-functional collaboration where everyone's holding the key. So this might be, so that person, that gatekeeper, might not be, and when you're thinking of it like in the RACI context, right, might not be the responsible, accountable, or consulted, but they might just need to be informed. So when change happens and a person is unaware of that change, but it might impact some process that they have, they do feel overlooked. So bringing them into the conversations early, getting their input maybe a little bit, and just so they're aware of it from the get-go, is usually, just to keep everyone informed, is usually, I feel, the best way to approach that. Was there another part to that question? Did I get that?
Yeah, to create buy-in and to support more transparent project management.
Yeah.
And then the second part you answered, yeah, remove gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So buy-in and transparent project management, communicate like crazy. Like, even if you think you're over communicating, communicate some more. That falls into, any agendas that you might have for meetings or any kind of decisions that might get made. Again, just to bring everyone in the loop, and just say, this is what we're going to try to do. Transparent project management, again, utilizing those tools is also really helpful. But yeah, communication, and just keeping everyone in the loop, I think is a pretty big step for that. So
great, thank you. A couple more questions, it looks like. How do you develop KPIs, or can you give some examples from your museum work?
For the museum work, so in my experience, we didn't utilize KPIs within the museums, which I think would be helpful to do. But I mean, for instance, your key performance indicators. So if you just go off of the schedule, scope, and budget, so if you're looking at your budget, right, and you're looking at what was projected for this one program, and then if you exceed like crazy in the actuality, right, like, so that's one of your KPIs is you definitely exceeded that. That's probably not a very successful sign. If your schedule, right, your projected schedule, like, we were supposed to have all this artwork up in the gallery by now and we have nothing up, also another indicator that lets you know you're probably not doing too well. There are other KPIs that also tie back in to like overall objectives within an organization that might be helpful. You can also do surveys, right? So if you, to figure out if you achieved your objective or your goal with programming or the exhibit, like, I know that sometimes surveys don't always work because you get a very minimal response rate, but it does help really paint that picture of if people understood what you were trying to do as well. Yeah, so sorry, I know KPIs would be a really, really good one to dive into more from a museum perspective. I totally agree with that. But unfortunately, from my museums that I've worked at, from my perspective, from where I worked, I didn't really utilize them too much, unfortunately.
Okay, so I'm trying to scroll, make sure I got all the questions. I think there's another one here. What path did you use to become a PMP, boot camps, PMI classes, etc.?
Oh yeah, so the Utah Museum of Fine Arts is a university museum, so which is the University of Utah, and they actually offered PMP prep courses. I think that prep course was offered by a company called Red Rock. research. So I took these courses offered by the U of U, put on by a different company. I did that, and then I studied for a month straight for the test. And I really recommend, I think the boot camps, I think those are good too. I've heard of these courses that I did, I think it was like 2 nights a week, 1 night a week for about 8 weeks or so. The boot camps, if you're short on time, that might be a good route. I would say the success for how I passed the test, I did a lot of practice exams. So that's, I think, a really crucial part of it. So take a course or something like that to get a foundation for everything, but then just take all the tests that you can get your hands on, pretty much practice tests, I should say.
Yeah, good advice. I know I myself have been wondering like what kind of coursework or, you know, webinars or whatever I could do. So that's very helpful information. Thank you.
Sure.
And then I think this is a question that's on a lot of people's minds. How did you market your museum experience and skills to industries like Carvana? What advice would you give?
Yeah. I'll say that again, I did touch on a few of those things at the beginning of the presentation. I really painted a picture of you know, facing challenges, but then overcoming them. And that's actually really valuable for a lot of employers, is that, you know, they'll ask that question, right? Like, what are some of your weaknesses? Or can you explain a situation where this happened, and blah, blah, blah. So those questions are, you know, are kind of like pessimistic, right? You're like, well, my weakness is I don't like people, or like this challenge happened and it was really bad. From there, you market those experiences as this challenge happened, or I have this weakness, but I overcome them in this way. So if you illustrate those examples of, yeah, there was that experience where I did go through something very similar, but this is how I got through it. And I will say a lot of them, especially in Carvana, I remember that in particular, but a lot of other places I interviewed for PM jobs, whenever I tell someone that exhibits are planned 2 to 3 years in advance, they're like, oh, like that's like a really ridiculously long time. So I guarantee you, your museum experience is going to be really impressive. Again, because just coming from that nonprofit background, you are already going through so many challenges and you are already overcoming those challenges. That's going to be so beneficial for them to know that you are a problem solver, and that you can overcome. So I hope that helps. That's kind of how I did that.
Yeah, I think it's good to know how museum experience, especially the project management skills, transfer to other fields. Definitely the problem
solving. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What did you say? I'm sorry, I missed that.
No, you're fine. Definitely the problem solving bit. Oh, the problem solving, yeah. PM in particular, definitely the problem solving, but also how do you motivate your teams to get the work done, or how do you enforce that they're gonna stay on their tasks? So that's a lot of, I have a skill set called gentle persistence, where I will like send them an email, and if I don't hear anything, I'll maybe send them an instant message, or I'll message them on the PM tool, or if we're in the office, I'll go find them and I'll be like, hey, did you blah, blah, blah. So yeah, kind of how you navigate people as well is pretty important too.
Yeah, and managing people is not easy.
Not easy.
It can be difficult.
Yeah.
And then just as an add-on to the question before about how, like, what did you do to get PMI certified? What about the part where you need to document previous example of project management to qualify for PMP?
Yes, so I did. So yeah, so again, you're probably working on projects already in museums. And so this is going to sound really bad, but I also hope it sounds really encouraging. You can spin your work in museums any way that you want. So I took my experience in exhibitions and inventories, things like that, and I spun it, and it's right there projects. So I spun it to show that these are my hours spent on these projects. So in your workload, whatever field you're in, whatever department you're in, I spent X amount of hours managing it and planning this programming, X amount of hours planning, you know, this event or marketing or things like that. So again, when you think of a project, that definition, all it means is a temporary endeavor with a start and end date. So just take that criteria and apply it to whatever work that you're doing in a museum, and there's your project, and those are your hours.
That's a really good way of looking at it. We're probably all completing projects every day,
Yes.
things that are on a smaller scale, but we don't even think of them that way, right?
Exactly.
So that's great. Yeah. Great. Well, at this time, I'd like to just make sure that I didn't miss any questions, or if you still have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat, or if you're more comfortable, you can unmute yourself at this time and ask your question that way too. We just had a question pop into the chat. I noticed Microsoft Project was not on your list of tools.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any experience with
Yeah,
that?
that's a good one. I learned, no, not any working experience with Microsoft Project. I played around in it a little bit, but no actual experience with it. I actually didn't, it's not on there just because I didn't have enough room on the slide. But no, definitely a good tool. It is pretty hardcore, I will say. It's a great tool for getting those Gantt charts like that. If you are serious about Gantt charts, get yourself Microsoft Projects. Otherwise, if you are looking just for a tool to get your feet wet, try any of those other tools I've listed. But for sure, I've heard nothing but good things about Microsoft Project. Definitely no ill will towards it at all.
And then someone's wondering if you can post that slide again.
Oh, yeah.
Where you had the tools.
Let's look. This one.
Great, thank you. And then any other questions for Christina? You also, I think, have her contact information. She put that on a slide, so I know how that goes. You, you think of questions later, and so, she's more than happy to answer those questions later on when you think of those.
Yeah, and I'll bring that up again too.
And then someone's asking, which tools do you favor? I think you said you liked Trello a lot.
Oh yeah, Trello's my love. Definitely recommend Trello. But if you get more into advanced projects, I'm gonna go back to, if you go more into advanced projects, I don't have any experience with Asana. I've heard that's a really good tool, but I don't really have any personal experience with it. So you could look into that. Or I would recommend RACI or Monday.com. So Carvana uses RACI. I think it's great. So much functionality. It's got a whole bunch of Kanban boards, Gantt charts, whatever you want, reporting, a whole bunch of stuff. Monday.com is probably similar. I say Monday.com because when Carvana transitioned to RACI from Monday.com, we had those few holdouts that didn't want to leave Monday.com. So that I would say, again, resistant to change. So that I would say you could look into that option as well. It seems like they got a few diehards for that one.
Yeah, I've heard of Monday.com, and I've heard people really like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then someone was asking to, just while we're on the topic, what about Slack, Discord?
Yeah,
do you recommend those?
Yeah, the instant messaging tools. Yeah, they're not bad. They're very useful, right? Again, that's that asynchronous communication. So I think the more communication tools that you introduce into your organization, the harder you're going to have in standardizing how to communicate with each other. So we have like 3 or 4 tools at Carvana, and you have to remember who likes to use Slack, who likes to use email, who likes to use this tool. That's why I recommend, for project purposes, enforcing only using the project tool for communicating updates. I would go to Slack if people aren't updating, like, where are you at, man? Why didn't you respond to my message and write? That's like my last resort. So that's why I think for communication about projects, do it all in the project tool if you have one.
And then someone just kind of commented that they use Asana. and that you can use a list or a Kanban view depending on how your tasks are laid out.
Yeah.
Then the nice thing is that you can get a really granular, but also sometimes it's a slippery slope of getting too specific.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I also don't have much experience with Asana. I think we were going to use it at one point at work, and then we decided not to. So that's good to know about it. And then we had another question. If you naturally follow the waterfall method, i.e. planning things to the letter, how do you adjust to become more agile?
Yeah, that would be like a hybrid approach, right? And I don't know if I actually really have a solid answer for this. Well, actually, let me clarify. So are you hoping to, I don't know if this person's still here, are they hoping to transition into agile from waterfall? Is that what that sounds like? Are you looking for both?
It sounds like, if Jennifer's still here, Jennifer Weber, she's the one who asked the question. I think it sounds like she wants to adjust to being more agile.
Hi, yes, I am still here. It's more like being more adaptable to change. Like I will get so far through a project, like I've planned, I know next Monday I'm installing XYZ. Oh wait, this part of this project won't be done until that point, so I can't move forward. I'm kind of backed myself into a corner when something goes slightly out of order or slightly wrong. Because I can't, like, I've planned XYZ so far in advance, I'm dependent on all of those other changes. How do I adjust to being more flexible with that, whereas like not everything's so stuck on one timeline?
So I would look into risk management plans. So risk management plan is a great way, or some sort of variation of it, and you can just do this for yourself, and it actually really doesn't have to be like super strenuous. Like you could actually, that's kind of what I did really. I did some sort of risk management where I made contingency plans for myself. So I would say, if this does get pushed out for whatever reason, this is how I would adjust for it. So I made plans for the plans that would fall through. So I don't know if you're already doing something similar, but that's kind of what my recommendation would be. So since if you are like a planner, hardcore planner like I am, contingency planning is probably how I would remedy that, because then at least you know, okay, I do need to shift gears, but at least I already know how to do that, if that helps at all.
Yeah, it makes sense. And currently I'm a team of one, so
in
some ways it's slightly more manageable than I don't have other people that I need to manage.
Right.
Thank you.
I feel that. I'm also a team of one, and I feel like I'm very difficult to manage. So that's some good advice for how to be more agile, to have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D.
All the plans.
All the plans. We had another question. Any recommendations for tools to assign resources across different projects? How to schedule a staff work for multiple projects? This might be moving more into portfolio management. Can the same tools be used? And then they just added or strategies.
Yes. So that actually depends on the tool that you would use. I can't speak for Asana or Monday.com, but in RACI there is a feature where you can measure effort assigned to a task. So say for instance, I know that this work is going to take me 2 hours to complete. I assign that effort hours into that task. And then there is a workload report function within the tool that I can pull up, and I can see where everyone's hours are for that week. And so that's a really great way to really break it down. And so that'll be multiple projects, things like that. You don't really have to silo the teams or the projects, because you can filter and say pull from these spaces so it displays all of that work. There might be some sort of time tracking tool, like just specifically for that, maybe outside the RACI. I'm not too sure. And maybe Monday.com and Asana, I'm assuming they would do something similar to do, which is it's just resource tracking. So I would how to schedule staff work. Yeah. So also within that as well. So for Carvana, we we only want certain team members working on 4 hours worth of project work a day out of their 8-hour workday. So you can set workload limits. So, and it'll flag to you. It'll say, this person is exceeded their work on project effort by an hour or 2 or whatever. It'll flag it as red. Okay, now that's my visual cue to rework some of the schedule so that they're not overloaded or anything like that. So yeah, does that help?
I think Airtable might also let you, I have very limited experiences with it. We mostly just use it to manage our social media at work, but I think Airtable lets you do it like when things are due and like on a time schedule, but I could be wrong.
Airtable, yeah, okay. We'll get it.
Yeah. Yeah, again, very limited experience with it. We use it for like a very specific thing, but I think it might have that capability. There's like the basic version, and then kind of like you talked about, all these different tools have different like plans. I think with Airtable, it's the same way. So yeah. And then someone said Trello has a calendar extension and it's awesome.
Yes, I love Trello.
I'll have to look into Trello. I had never heard of it until tonight. So
it's so great.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
I'll look into it. All right. Well, do we have any other questions for Christina? Someone's asking if your PowerPoint will be available to anybody who wants it.
Yeah. Could I send that to you, Laura, and then you can distribute, or?
Yeah, you can send it to me, and then I can send it out to the list, everyone who registered.
Great.
If that's okay with you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh yeah, paper and pencil people. I'm still a paper and pencil person, but it's like, it's so, just using these tools. Right?
Dang, History Museum folks.
So I will say, I did get someone to convert to Trello who was pencil and paper. And it's because I pointed out to her that it's so hard to keep track of everything paper because things get lost so easily. So it's like, if you can think of specific examples where it's like work fell through the cracks because it was being tracked on paper, like that might shut some people up.
That might change their minds. Yeah,
change their minds a little bit. Again, just that trial period. Just try it. Just try it for 2 weeks and then see what. If you don't like it, we'll go back. But yeah, so that's always.
Yeah, and then someone said hard copy in one hand, tech in the other. That's always the way. I'm the same way. I have an online calendar, whatever, to-do list, and then I have my agenda book too. I have both copies. Maybe that's like the registrar in me. I don't know, having hard copies in. I don't know, but that's a good idea too.
My scratch pad. That's what I got for sure.
Exactly. All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions for Christina, are there? If not, I'll just say thanks so much, Christina. This presentation was so helpful. I know I'm not the only one who's going to walk away from it tonight with some great ideas and some new tools in my tool belt. So thanks so much. And then just as a reminder, this was recorded. So this will be available in probably a week on our YouTube channel. So if you came in a little late or you just want to refresh yourself, no worries. You can catch the recording. And like Christina said, she'll share her slides with me and then I'll send it out to the list. So if you want those slides handy, you'll have those too. And then in the chat, just as a reminder, I dropped my contact information. If you're interested in presenting yourself during a Skillshare, contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you. Also join us on the Mighty Network. We'd love to have you join our membership base. And then if you want some awesome t-shirts, tote bags, mugs, also check out our fundraiser on Bonfire. So thanks for joining us, everybody. We really appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you.